The most joyful thing we can ever do with our money is be generous with it and use it to solve problems that we're passionate about solving. It's brought me far more fulfillment than I would have ever received in a bigger screen.
That was Joshua Becker, and this is the Brendan Carr Podcast. Today, my guest is Joshua Becker. Joshua is one of the world's leading minimalism bloggers at his website, becomingminimalist.com. He is the author of The More of Less and The Minimalist Home. And in this episode, Joshua and I discuss how to use minimalism to reduce your stress and increase your financial freedom, and then to use your regained energy and finances to make a bigger difference in the world around you. So Joshua, you've been doing this for years. You are a huge voice in minimalism, and I'm curious, what's still hard for you?
At least in my home, so it's me and my wife. We have two kids. They're 16 and 13, and I don't think anything ever stays the same when you have a growing family. And people get into different passions and different hobbies and different talents, and they grow into different clothing sizes and different food preferences. And so it seems like things always still enter the home. And it's actually one of the reasons I've always kind of liked the title for my blog, calling it Becoming Minimalist rather than Being Minimalist. Because I think, I don't know, even 11 years later, it still feels like a evolving process all the time, trying to discern strategically what is most needed in my life and what is just a distraction.
Yeah, and you use the word discernment there. It seems a lot of this is about your sense of your priorities in life and things. How do you find that minimalism has helped you to achieve the things that you really care about?
When I first started writing about minimalism, the people writing about it were living out of a backpack, or they had their items down to 100 things, and that never really appealed to me, especially because we were a family and we lived in the suburbs, and there were just certain things that were needed. But what I discovered was that even though people were trying to own fewer and fewer things, it seemed to look different from person to person. And it seemed to be based on what they most wanted to accomplish with their life. So someone who wanted to travel the world would own things that would allow them to travel. Someone who wanted to get out of debt was, that was their biggest goal in life at the moment. They were making certain decisions. And so I really learned that minimalism isn't about a certain number of things, but what it is about is realizing what is most important, what I want to accomplish with my life, and then removing the distractions that keep me from it. And granted, that may go beyond physical possessions, and oftentimes it does. But for most people, we own more stuff than we need. And so those possessions have very much become a distraction to the life that we wish we were living instead. Mm-hmm. And so I would write about this and talk about how, like, we stayed in our home. We moved years later, but we're just paring down, not getting so everyone just owned a backpack of stuff. And someone commented early on in the blog, I remember it like it was yesterday, and she said, "I really like your view of minimalism. It seems so rational." And I loved that phrase because I think minimalism should be thoughtful. It should be something that we are intentional about, and we discern what possessions we need that help us accomplish our purpose in life, and what are all the things that we've accumulated that are actually keeping us from living bigger, more meaningful lives.
And I wonder, how do you still, though, decide about keeping things that maybe don't seem rational? Do you find stuff that's got a special emotional significance that you still want to hang on to?
Oh, sure. And I would probably define, I guess, depending on how you want to define rational. I think art is a pretty good example.
Yeah.
Someone might say, well, what purpose does, art serve in fulfilling your purpose? And I would think, man, I think art is incredibly important. I think art brings beauty into our world. I think good art, challenges our thoughts and assumptions and causes us to see the world in a different way. So there is a space for beauty. There's a space for appreciating our past and the people that have spoken into our lives and the accomplishments that we've marked along the way. So there's space for all those things, and I think it's still rational and intentional and thoughtful to hold on to some of them. But a museum isn't great because every piece of artwork ever created is hanging on the wall.
Right.
A museum is great because it's been carefully curated and just those pieces that help us remember that time or that artist or that season of an artist's life. Just a few things can bring back all we need to appreciate that moment in time.
Yeah. And in a home too, I think that is often shown as well. You can see spaces where it's one signature piece of art rather than a cluster, or these sort of design principles that sometimes can highlight the beauty of a piece by using minimalism.
Yeah. Or, art communicates our values. One of the first spaces that I minimized my car first and foremost, and the next, not getting rid of it, but just took everything out of my car that didn't need to be there. And the next thing I did was my living room. And I can remember looking around my living room, and there were a few pieces of art or photos that were meaningful to me. And then there were tons of they matched the couch, or they were on clearance at Michael's or something, but they didn't have any real meaning in my life.
Yeah.
And I discovered when I got rid of those things, that soon the pieces of art that remained, the decorations that remained, they held specific meaning into my life, our lives, I should say, or they inspired a certain way of living that we wanted to live, or we wanted to communicate to our kids. And so again, I would probably just go back to that same phrasing, being rational and intentional about the things that we keep, even when it comes down to the art and the decorations in our homes.
Yeah. So you've written a book about how to do this in the home, the minimalist home. And I wonder, what would be some of the tips for people who are starting out and they're thinking, I want to try this, I want to do it. How should they get going in the home?
Yeah. The Minimalist Home was written to really provide a framework for somebody who wants to apply minimalist principles to their possessions, that they've seen how our possessions are actually keeping us from happiness rather than resulting in it. And it walks people through the home. It follows what I consider my methodology, the one that worked for me, the one that I've helped tens of thousands of other people do. And it encourages people to go room by room, easiest to hardest, starting with their most lived-in spaces. That's probably the best way to summarize the steps, because a lot of people, they hear about minimalism and their mind races to, number one, the hardest thing they'd ever have to get rid of. Like, this sounds great, but I could never get rid of books, so I could never live this lifestyle. And I say, don't start with books. Start with spatulas, or just start with the junk in your home that you don't even want there anymore. You just haven't taken the time to get rid of. Or they think of like the hardest room in their home to minimize, like the garage or the basement or the arts and crafts room or the hobby, shelves of camping gear. And they go to work in the garage, they spend an hour and a half and they don't see any difference whatsoever. And so they throw up their hands in frustration and forget that they ever had the idea. And so I try to change that mindset and, like, how about starting your car? You could do that in probably 10 or 15 minutes, maybe your living room or your bedroom, work your way to the bathrooms and the closets, and starting with those easy spaces where you can gain a victory and you can notice how owning less improves your home. brings you more calm and peace and less stress and more focus in life. And then you use that motivation to tackle the next hardest room in your home. So by the time you get to books, you're like, gosh, I've seen owning less benefit my life in every other area. How would I apply this to books? Or how would I apply this to my camping gear? Or I so enjoy my living room and my kitchen and my bedroom now. I need to make this change in my garage. How am I going to do it? A little bit like building up that muscle, I think. One of the things that actually wasn't even my idea, but my editor really pushed me on it, and I'm so glad he did. He said, it seems to me if you are going to title a book, The Minimalist Home, you need to define what is the purpose of home in the first place.
Ooh.
And I thought, man, that's a question I don't know if I've ever sought an answer to. What is the purpose of home? Or what is the purpose of a specific room in your home? What is the purpose of your bedroom? What is the purpose of your dining room, your living room? What do you want to accomplish in that space? And then what do you need to keep to accomplish that? And then what are the other things that you just kind of distract you from that purpose and make it less productive and less fruitful in the way that the room should function in your home? There's really it's a good exercise thinking through what is the purpose of my home anyway.
Yeah, now I'm curious. What was your answer?
You have to read the book. No, no, I'm just
Good
kidding.
sale.
That's not what this is about. So two purposes, because I've asked the question to rooms full of people, and usually they race to, okay, rest and calm and peace. It should be a respite from the turmoil of the world, right? When you think of a healthy home life, you think of acceptance and security and safety and love and a place where you can rest. So most people think of that. But the goal of rest is never just more rest, right? We rest so that we can live a more productive life out in the world. So we can work better. I always say I don't vacation to get out of work, but I vacation so that I can do better work when I get back. And so home should be the same way. It should be a place where we find rest and security and safety, and refreshment. But it also becomes a launching pad, a little bit like it's a port for a ship, but it's also a launching pad where we recoup ourselves so that we can go and our families can go out and live their best lives in the world, making the biggest contribution in society that they possibly can. That's the goal. That's the purpose of home, in my opinion.
Wow, I've never done that exercise, but that's a really rich definition, and it's so clearly aligned with your values too, or what you've expressed about work and a contribution, putting yourself out into the world. You've even said work is love. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to mention because some people from the outside and even some people within the movement, I think, unfortunately, see minimalism as a way to check out of life. That I'm just going to own less stuff so that I never have to work another day in my life, and I'm just going to lay on the beach forever. And I like laying on the beach, but maybe for like a week, and then I'm like, okay, let's go accomplish something, and let's make a difference in the world. Let's be significant. And so for me, and I think for most people, when you get down to it, minimalism isn't about checking out of life. It's about removing distractions so that I can free up my life, and so I can free up my most finite resources, my time and my money and my energy, so that I can live a bigger life and make the biggest contribution that I can. And somewhere along the way, I have pretty deep thoughts on retirement and what that has done to society and the way we view work. But somewhere along the way, we saw work as something to get out of. And when the goal of work becomes, I want to make money so that I can stop working, we lose the entire nature of it. Work should be a selfless act. Work should be, at least in this division of labor society that we live in now, work should be me doing what I'm good at to enrich another person's life so that they can do what they're good at to enrich another person's life. And when we're all doing what we're good at for the sake of other people, this is how society moves forward. Work should be selfless and work should be love. And when we see it as just a way to make money, to buy bigger houses and nicer cars and more clothing, I think that there's pretty limited joy and fulfillment that we find in work when we treat it selfishly as opposed to selflessly.
Right. But that idea that you get out of being something that positively impacts another to help them positively impact another, by definition, will create a positive ripple effect.
Yes, I hope. I think it does. I think that kindness is contagious. I think that the generosity is something that we all desire to be true of ourselves. If you ask a room full of people, how many of you want to be generous? I mean, I think every hand goes up in the room. Like, this is something that we want to be true of ourselves. We need to remind ourselves of that we want to be generous with our time and our money and our talents. Selfishness comes pretty natural to us. Selflessness takes intention and thoughtfulness. But I found minimalism, frees up time and money so that we can walk more in that life of generosity that we all desire.
Yeah. And you said before that you have some thoughts about retirement. I'm curious now what you think about that, because having been in the military, retirement is something that guys who are 20 years old will be talking about. There's this very near sense that you can retire from the military and have a pension, and that will have a big effect on your life. So what are those ideas that you've been kicking around?
How many of those end up doing something different? And how many of them just golf and lay on the beach and go out for coffee, right? Like my guess is a pretty high percentage of them continue to work. It's just in a different capacity, or am I getting that wrong?
I think you're spot on. Some will even do almost the same job after retirement, but they'll keep doing it in a civilian capacity.
Yeah. And so when I speak of retirement and kind of my arguments against it, I'm speaking entirely of this life of leisure, not transitioning work. I'm just physically speaking, there's some jobs that you can do at one age that you can't do at another. But my grandfather really probably shaped my thinking of this more than anyone else. He's 98 and he still works full time. Wow. And he loves it. And when you look at history, retirement is a pretty new phenomenon. Like, maybe in the last 120 to 125 years, it's actually pretty rare that humans would ever stop working. And I don't know if it's working so well. It tends to lead to a lot of stress. How many commercials about saving for retirement and articles have you read about, are you saving enough and will you have enough when you retire? So I think it adds a lot of stress to our lives. I think it adds, I think it takes out some of the best work of our lives. As my grandpa says, the best fruit grows on the oldest trees. And so maybe the work we do changes, but I think this idea that we would retire from contributing to the world around us. I have a good friend who had a pretty successful business, and he retired like in his early 60s, and now he just does a lot of volunteer work in the community, and so he doesn't need to be paid for the work that he does with this nonprofit organization. So work can look Work can look different based on what the circumstances might be, but I'm one who would much rather have work that I enjoy doing, and do it for the rest of my life, as opposed to looking for a way to get out of contributing to the world. Because I don't think there's any fulfillment there. Like I said, I don't think there's much fulfillment in drinking coffee and golfing every single day. It's fun for a little while, but I think we all kind of yearn for something bigger than that type of life, don't we?
I think so. Yeah. So you're someone who has lots of these pursuits that you could be going after. You could be speaking or writing or family time, all these things. How do you make decisions about where you put your energy?
Well, I think it's probably a never-ending battle. So I wouldn't say that I'm perfect with this with every decision that I make. But I've come to realize that the filter that a lot of people use of will this make me more money is a pretty poor filter, because there's no end to it. There's always something I could be adding to my schedule, adding to my life that would bring more money.
Yeah.
And so I try to reframe the question or the decision, and I ask myself, will this help more people? Or will this be a better help to people? And when you ask yourself that question, the things that you commit to doing change, because there comes a point where adding something else to my schedule doesn't end up helping more people. Or when I think of my two kids, they're 16 and 13 now, and the father that I need to be to them so that they can become healthy citizens who, contribute to society, right? Like, this becomes a choice that I make, not just because I love them, but because I see this as an important investment with my life. And so, I mean, it's easy for me to say that, obviously, and things come up, and you hope you're kind of using that filter when you make your decisions. But I feel called. I've felt this way I've been doing this full time now for 6 months, where I see that I've had a good effect, a fruitful effect in helping people own less, seeing the benefits of own less, and seeing changed lives because of it. And because I see that fruit, and I see people's lives being changed in that way, and that seems to be the best good that I can bring into the world at this point in time. That tends to be the filter that I use. So you reach out and you're like, hey, do you want to be on this podcast, and can we sit down and talk about minimalism? And I think, gosh, here's a great opportunity to reach some new people. And here's a guy who has some thoughtful, intentional conversations, and I'm in. This is a good use of my time today.
Well, I'm honored that you did think that, and it seems that a lot of these things that you're talking about comes back to your idea of, one, having priorities, but two, the questions that you ask to find those priorities. How do you come up with these questions that you ask yourself or your audiences?
Oh, I was struck by someone who once said this quote. He said, "Thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through the lips and the fingertips." Thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through the lips or the fingertips. And he was making the case for the importance of writing and journaling, or speaking, if that tends to be where you communicate better. And when you do a lot of writing, or when you do a lot of speaking, particularly speaking on different topics, you're forced to think through the thoughts in your head and disentangle them and learn to put words to them and express them. And you can write a sentence and go back to it and think, okay, is this really true? Is this true for me? Is this true for all people? What might be some of the exceptions where this wouldn't apply? And do I need to include that follow-up sentence here? And I just think that for me, the process of writing on a consistent basis for 11 years about minimalism and about some of the topics that surround it, about values and purpose and gratitude and money and work and play and family and home and just all the issues that that kind of surround that topic. Probably I've just stumbled onto a few helpful questions that I've found helpful to me and helpful to others when I repeat them, and they're like, yeah, that is a good way to reframe that for sure.
Joshua, you've now started a nonprofit too. What prompted that?
The story that prompted it is I wanted to write a book about money. I wanted to write a book about minimalism, which became The More of Less, which is my first book. And I wanted to write a book about how money is not the answer in our lives, that 72% of Americans have financial related stress, and yet we're one of the wealthiest nations in the history of the world. And I'm like there's plenty of money in our country, and people have plenty of money. Why are we so stressed out about it? And so kind of really taking a deep dive into that reality about how we so often look for happiness and security and money. And when it doesn't provide it, we get stressed out and think that we don't have enough, rather than thinking maybe we're looking in the wrong place for it. So anyway, so we started shopping this book idea out to different publishers, and we approached 10 publishers, and 9 of them came back with an offer on the book.
Wow.
And I asked my agent, well, what do we do now? And he said, well, you just bid them against each other until you decide on one to take. And it became pretty clear early on that I was going to get offered a pretty significant amount of money to write a book about how money doesn't bring happiness or security in life. And we, of course, were living a very minimalist life. We weren't buying a lot of stuff, didn't have a lot of expenses. And I remember sitting on the couch with Kim and my wife and just saying, well, I guess we're going to be put to the test pretty early on. Like, are we really going to live out what we believe to be true? Or are we just going to start buying a bunch of stuff with the money that we have? And it wasn't too long of a conversation so what we did is most of the book advance from both of those books is what funded the starting and still funds a large piece of the administrative needs of the Hope Effect, which is changing how the world cares for orphans by focusing on family-based solutions, particularly in developing countries, as opposed to institutional orphanages where kids aren't able to develop correctly. The statistics are something like 70 to 80% of children who grow up in an institutional orphanage end up incarcerated, in prostitution, or homeless. And it's just because children develop best in a family. With the affection and attention that they would receive in a family. And so how can we mimic that for orphan children around the world? So that's what the Hope Effect does, working in both Honduras and Mexico currently.
Wow, that's beautiful, and born out of that book project that turned out to be so lucrative. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been very fulfilling, and I honestly think the most joyful thing we can ever do with our money is be generous with it and use it to solve problems that we're passionate about solving. It's brought me far more fulfillment than I would have ever received in a bigger screen.
Yeah. How has minimalism impacted your finances? We
found pretty early on that I mean, only positively, I should say. We bought less. We were spending less money buying things that we didn't need, and so there's certainly you cut down on your expenses. We found when we were minimizing that we gave a lot of things away, but there were some things that were expensive or large that you could sell and make some money on. And so it didn't take us long. Actually, I think if I scroll back through my blog posts, that maybe within the first 3 or 4 days of minimizing, I started making the financial connections to, man, we've been living paycheck to paycheck, not because there wasn't enough money coming in. We've been living paycheck to paycheck because we just keep spending more and more and more. And when you start to change that side of the ledger, you start to see that maybe we didn't need to be quite as financially stressed as we were, or as financially discontent as we'd been for so many years of our life. It's not true for all people, but man, it's true for a higher percentage of people than they realize. You get a lot of pushback, and they're like, well, you don't know my life, and you don't know how little I make. And I'm like, you're right, I don't. But I think for most people in our country, if you were to adopt a minimalist lifestyle, you would realize that you've probably had enough money coming in all along. So certainly that change in just how it looks, and I suppose then the purpose of money, like just what is the purpose of money in my life, and is it to spend it all on myself, or can I use it to help other people and solve problems? And starting to see it's just the potential that money has in our life can be so much more. I use the phrase this way: money is only as valuable as what we choose to spend it on. And so if we choose to buy a new purse or a new pair of jeans or a bigger screen television, that's all it ever can be worth. If we use it to have experiences with our family and create memories with our family, or use it to invest in a course or education or personal development, then it has even longer impact and bigger potential in our life. Or if we use it to change the direction of an orphan child somewhere around the world, who knows what the potential could be in that person's life, and what they could end up doing and accomplishing going forward.
Joshua, I've heard you say that each possession that we have can increase anxiety. I'm wondering, what is that relationship there with minimalism and mental health?
Yeah, Randy Elkhorn was the first one who I ever saw use that phrase. Every increased possession adds increased anxiety onto our lives. Everything that we own takes up physical space in our home, but it also takes up mental space in our mind. And like one by one, we don't really feel that necessarily, but when you start talking about a large accumulation of possessions, we can start to feel the weight of some of that onto our lives. Someone emailed one time and she said, hey, I understand what you're saying about minimalism, but if I have an extra set of china in my basement, how does that make any difference? And I thought, well, that's a good point. If you just have an extra set of china, how does it? And I eventually wrote back and I'm like, look, if all you have in your basement is an extra set of china, then minimalism isn't going to make a difference in your life. The problem is most of us have boxes and boxes of things and shelves of stuff. And how many times have you thought to yourself, gosh, all that stuff in the basement, I need to go through it? Or every time you pull into the garage and it's too full, or it's just full of things and there's boxes of things on the shelves, and like, I need to go through that someday. I need to go through that someday, right? We all know that everything we own has to be handled by somebody. Either we're going to do it or a loved one is going to have to do it during an already pretty emotional time in their lives. So everything, we have to deal with, we're responsible for it as long as it's in our possession. And so it adds stress. But there's another piece, just how possessions are a physical distraction all around us. We're animals, and it's hard to sneak up on a rabbit, or hard to sneak up on a fly, because they're always are like subconsciously aware of their surroundings, and they know what's around them, and we're exactly the same way. We're kind of scanning a room, even if we're not doing it consciously. We're scanning the room and what's around us, and what's happening, so that if something were to be out of place, we would notice it. And it's why you can sit in a tidy, decluttered room and feel calm and peaceful.
Yeah.
But when you put yourself in a cluttered, full room, it just feels stressful and burdensome on your shoulders. And so this is how possessions add stress in our immediate visual clutter way, and also just in the, what are the responsibilities of my life, and what do I need to take care of?
Yeah, it's so palpable when you think about it. I mean, right after I read your book, More of Less, I read this book called The Book of Hygge, which is this Danish idea of sort of comfort and coziness. And the ideas overlap so much. It was this idea that if you're in a place where things are simple and clean, that you just naturally can feel a little bit more relaxed and more at ease, and that there's this relationship between, I think the phrase that they used was something like making the space around you kind of sacred, having a sense that the things around you really do matter, and it just holds true.
And so you would point to some of the same effects in your own life, right? I mean,
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, like the workspace that I have, for sure, when it's cords everywhere and things are a mess, I find it a little bit harder to concentrate than if I can clear space, especially if I'm going to do something by hand. I'll get away from my computer and the cords and the keyboards and everything, and I will get down on another desk, and if I'm going to write somebody a note or something, and that just gives me, I think, gives me a clearer mental picture of what I'm trying to do, and helps me to put a little more energy into it.
Yeah. And then you can multiply it all through the course of your day, getting ready in the morning, opening up your closet, and how many clothes are crammed in there, and which one are you going to pick? Or you move to the bathroom and there's things all over the counter, or you kind of fiddling through your cabinet to find different things, and then you go to the kitchen to make your breakfast, and you can kind of feel this and see this in all different parts of our day.
All of these things, especially in those places that add up, the kitchen, the closet, everything, were a big factor when you were moving from Vermont to Arizona. How did that affect your move? Because a lot of my listeners are military folks who are moving every couple of years, so I think moving is a big part of their lives.
Moving is a great time to minimize. It's the one time in our life, as many of your listeners know, where we have to handle everything like 4 times. We have to put it in a box, and we have to take the box out to the truck, and then we have to bring the box into the new home and unbox it again. And so certainly the fewer things you have, the easier it is to move and to be free in that way. Maya Angelou says we need so much less than we think we need. And I found that when we minimized our possessions, we got rid of maybe 60-70% of our stuff. We were in a 2,300 square foot home. And it wasn't an overnight process. I'll mention it took us 9 months to go through the home, and we moved 3.5 years later into a smaller home and got rid of even some more things along the way. Wow. But it felt like we were more free. It felt like we were less tied down to a space, because we could pack up easier and move. And I was never forced to move. I wasn't in a military situation where I knew I was going to be moving and I had to go wherever I was being sent, or just that transition was always near in the future, but I can imagine owning fewer things would make that transition easier. I would feel like when you go on a trip, you don't take everything in your closet on the trip because it's easier to get around when you're carrying less stuff. And I think if I knew I had to be moving a lot, I would probably embrace that. I would try to embrace that reality as much as I could and think to myself, okay, if I'm not filling up every space in my home, then when I do have to transition, it's going to be easier. I can look more forward to the new adventure as opposed to dreading having to go through everything again, and kind of lean into that mindset and lean into that lifestyle with the things that I own, as opposed to creating an environment where that was going to be difficult and painful and time and energy consuming.
Well, Joshua, if people want to embrace this and learn more from you, where should they look for you online?
My website is becomingminimalist.com, and I always say it's the home base for everything I do, and certainly there's books and social media and all that where I'm involved in different things, but Becoming Minimalist is the home base where everything flows out of. So I would send people there if they wanted to find out more.
All right. Well, I'll put a link to that down in the show notes and to some of your other stuff if anybody's looking for that so they can check it out. And Joshua, my final question is, what do you think a leader can do to create a group culture where people have a clear sense of their priorities?
I think that a leader, number one, should be raising this question for people on what are their priorities. I don't know if a lot of people are asking this themselves in their personal lives, or I've discovered it's a question that I need to return to often. That you can set your priorities one day, but living them out in the following days takes intention. I would say what I have most learned through minimalism is that I could have easily listed out my priorities, that what I would have said was most important to me and what I most wanted to accomplish with my life. But I had accumulated a whole bunch of things, physical possessions, as a prime example, that weren't contributing to those priorities. They were actually keeping me from walking in those priorities, but I didn't see it. I didn't notice it until someone introduced me to minimalism, and I started noticing how all the things I had accumulated were actually keeping me from my priorities. And so I think, number one, a leader should help people define their priorities, but also help people define what things in their life are actually distracting from those priorities, and allowing them to accomplish less in those priorities than if they would have removed those hindrances from their lives.
Cool. Joshua, thank you so much.
This is good. I appreciate it, man.
Everybody, that was Joshua Becker, author of The More of Less and The Minimalist Home. And if you want to help us get more great guests like this on the show, then be sure to give us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. That's a huge help. And we'll catch you next time.